Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And taking on our audience tonight, the Conservative Culture Secretary, Karen Bradley, the Labour Chairman who ran the party's general election campaign, Ian Lavery, the Mail on Sunday columnist, Peter Hitchens, the property investor who helped set up the Brexit campaign, Leave.eu, Richard Tice, and a former Labour Party advisor turned stand-up comedian, Aisha Hazarika. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. And remember, at home, you can join in this debate, as always, Facebook, Twitter, hashtag BBCQT, text 83981, and push the red button to see what other people are saying. Let's have our first question, which is from Alan Wickham. Alan Wickham, please.
Does the country need a good dose of socialism?
No.
OK. Peter Hitchens.
Well, it's been having a good dose of socialism for a very long time, and under several governments, some of them calling themselves Labour, some New Labour, some Conservative. We have an economy which almost anybody 100 years ago would regard as very close to being communist in the amount of state intervention. So I don't think, and we are, as a result of these many, many years of state intervention, heavily in debt and in grave economic trouble, and we also have a welfare state we can't afford. There are many things that are attractive about a socialist program to begin with, but the problem is that they cost a very heavy price, and we continue to pay it. I don't think that Mr. Corbyn and his Labour Party have any particular answer to any of those problems. That's not to say that I think that the Tories have any answers to them either, but I think that those who really think that they would have a transformation of the country if Mr. Corbyn went into Downing Street, and much like the people in France who thought that President Hollande would transform their country and were so deeply disappointed when he didn't.
Alan Wickham. Alan, do you agree with Peter Hitchens that we've got socialism already?
Well, my question really stems from the last general election, which I think has rather confused matters, because it does give the impression that there is quite a swing within the country towards socialism.
Are you in favour of that?
Well, I don't agree with the idea that there is a swing. I think the general election was actually to do with a protest vote. People were protesting because they didn't want another election.
All right. Ian Lavery, a dose of socialism that seemed to be offered in Brighton this week.
Well, we've seen the Labour Party conference this week. An absolutely phenomenal event. 13,000 people in Brighton for the Labour Party conference. 7,000 people applied for credentials for the conference. If socialism means a call for decent conditions, wages, terms and conditions at work, if it means supporting the NHS like it should be supported, paying the nurses and the doctors and everyone else, decent wages, terms and conditions, if it means decent housing for ordinary people, if it means a good education, a national education service for everyone, and I could go on and on, that is a good dose of socialism. Okay. And I welcome it very, very, very much.
Karen Bradley.
Well, you'll probably not be surprised to find me disagree with Ian on this. I don't think the country needs a good dose of socialism. I disagree with what Ian describes as socialism, because I think it is the state knows best, and I don't think the state always does know best. And I think, actually, we need to restate and refight those battles that we thought were over in the 80s about state control, nationalisation. Yes, I agree that we do want to have good public services, but we can't have good public services without a strong economy to pay for them, and you don't get that through socialism.
Aisha,
you don't get it from the Conservative Party.
Aisha, you were a staunch supporter of Labour under Blair and Brown. What do you think now? Do you think more socialism is needed? Do you agree with Ian Lavery?
Well, I think the country is ready for a change, because I think a lot of people think that the economy and society doesn't work for them and their kids and their grandkids. When you see people struggling to get on the housing ladder, when you have nurses and teachers and firefighters who've effectively had a pay freeze for a very long time, wages haven't gone up since the financial crash. So whether you call it socialism or whether you call it a bit more fairness, I think people are ready for a change, because people think the Conservative government is a bit like one of those driverless cars that Uber is trying to develop.
The number of you with your hands up, we've been round the panel except for Richard. I'll come to him now, and then I'll come to those of you who want to talk about that. Richard Tice, you'll go.
The issue is there's different types of socialism, and what the current Labour leadership are planning is completely different from what we saw under Blair and Brown. What they're proposing is a return to the 1970s, nationalisation, tearing up of private sector contracts. Let's just remember what happened in the 70s under a Labour government. We had to go with a begging bowl to the International Monetary Fund to ask for more money. And by the end of their single electoral term, we weren't collecting our rubbish and we weren't burying the dead. And that, I don't think, is sensible socialism.
OK, who's at the front there?
I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell want to take us back to the 70s. I think they want to take us back into the early 1900s and relaunch a communist revolution.
Ian, do you want to answer him?
I think you'll find that the general public feel a lot different to what you do, sir. The fact that Jeremy Corbyn, as you describe him, is wholly inaccurate. Jeremy is one of the most popular politicians in this country and has been for many years. He attracted tens of thousands of people no matter where he went during the election campaign.
So do we want a pop star, or do we want somebody who can run the
message of hope and aspiration for everybody in society, not just a select few at the top. Jeremy is very, very well thought of right the way through communities up and down this country.
OK, let's have...
So is Hitler.
All right, well, here's the person in yellow up there at the back.
Hi, where we're referencing socialism to the Labour Party, I mean, you're saying it's going to be better, but as recent events shown at the Labour conference, there is anti-Semitism at the conference. There is Labour repealed on manifesto promises for, you know, the tuition fees for children at, for kids at university. I mean, is that what socialism is going to be under Labour? I mean, yourself, Ian, you have campaigned to change the way Labour elects MPs locally. Locally, MPs currently are democratically elected. You want to get rid of that. You want to insert an authoritarian presence in the local system. How is that any good?
OK, well, we'll let him answer that in a moment. You on the right there.
If Jeremy Corbyn becomes the Prime Minister, will he bankrupt the country in his first term, or will it take him 2 terms to finish the job?
Will he bankrupt the country?
The truth is, he's already accepted that actually there's going to be a run on the pound, so, you know, the sterling's going to collapse, global investors are going to disappear, foreign investors won't invest in this country, and the tragedy is, you know, it's the rich that will leave the country, and it's the least well-off in society who will suffer the most. I think he'll bankrupt the country within 1 electoral term.
OK. All right. You, sir, over there. Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn has given the Labour Party its pride and its dignity back. And we are coming. Tories are on the run.
Peter Hitchens, what's your view of Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I've always thought that if you had a socialist party in the country, it made sense for it to have a socialist leader. And I could never really understand why people got so exercised that they picked somebody who agreed with socialism to lead the Socialist Party. And if you want to have that kind of party, that's the sort of person who should lead it. The thing that baffles me much more is that there is no Conservative Party in this country and no Conservative leader for it. It would be wonderful if there were a Conservative Party with a leader as Conservative as Jeremy Corbyn as Socialist. I think we're entitled in a two-party democracy to have differences. And I've never joined in the denigration of Jeremy Corbyn and the things which are said against him. He's entitled to hold this view. He's also he's set a very good example in politics of being civil to his opponents. And I think this is an example a lot of people should follow. And you cannot conceivably attack him for that. And I believe very much that if you have a serious adversarial democracy, then that is the kind of leadership you want on one side. The real problem is it's so lacking on the other side.
OK, you say that, and Karen, I'll come to you, but I'd like to have the question from Maurice Bibb. We'll stick on this topic between the two parties. But Maurice, let's have your question.
Does the panel think Theresa May will finish her full term as PM?
As PM. Well, will she stick there, as her close associate Damien Green today was saying she would? Karen Bradley, what's your view? Yes. And what do you say about what Peter said about the Conservative Party?
Yes, I think Theresa May will, because she is a...
You think she'll fight the next election?
She is a resilient woman who is determined to get on and get the job done. And she knows the public service that she needs to deliver, and she will make sure she does that. But I think, you know, Peter says we don't want to have attacking of politicians. I absolutely agree. I don't want to attack Jeremy Corbyn for anything personally, but I am shocked that we've just seen a Labour Party conference with £312 billion worth of extra promise of spending. That's borrowing that our children and grandchildren will have to repay. I think that's the argument we need to be having about actually how we make that strong economy, how we keep those jobs, how we make sure we have the investment, how we make sure we don't have the run on the pound that the Labour Party are apparently planning for.
Okay, you borrow all the time. The Treasury is constantly borrowing.
But we've got the deficit
Why do you pretend you've sorted out the economy?
We've got the deficit down.
Karen, we also have had 7 years of Conservative austerity, which has not worked. And it has been the poorest that have paid the brunt of it, and it's not helped the economy either.
We've created 3.5 million jobs, 1.8 million children now in good and outstanding schools that weren't in 2010.
Wages have not gone up.
Let's go back to the basic question we've got. Socialism, Theresa May and the Tory party. Waving sometimes helps, but not always, but I will go to you.
Thank you. I mean, let's have a look. Privatisation of the railways that Jeremy's talking about. An excellent idea. A couple of years ago, we had a Southern franchise that was in government hands. It made a profit. Yeah, then it was privatised again by this Tory government. Yeah, so that's money right there that's gone to private investors rather than the public purse to pay for our public services.
So you're in favour of renationalisation?
Yes, I am. We've gone a long way since the 1970s. We've moved forward.
OK, and you, sir, here.
I'm just wondering who Theresa May will bribe next to stay in power, rather than give nurses an actual pay rise, because they've had a 14% real terms pay cut. Yeah. And I think that's a disgrace.
OK. On the gangway there, you sir, in the blue shirt, yes. And then the man behind you. The man in the beard second, and you in the blue shirt first, if that's all right. That makes sense?
Which blue shirt?
Which blue shirt? Now, you've all got blue shirts on. The man in the gangway with the blue shirt, that's the man. You, sir, yes. Yeah.
I listened to the absolute rubbish that came out of the Labour Party conference this week. What they seem to be doing is living in some sort of fantasy land. Do they realise that the national debt in this country is £2 trillion, which equates to £30,000 for every single citizen in this country? And what do the Labour Party want to do? They want to splash out billions of pounds on some airy-fairy projects. The national debt at the present time is going up at the rate of £5,000 a second. And the last thing we need is a party which increases this burden on our grandchildren. It's got to be paid off at some point.
Ian Lavery, your man.
With regards to the debt, the Tories have borrowed more money than the Labour Party has ever done. And it's the Tory party that's ratcheting up the debt at this moment in time. I'll tell you what the Labour Party want. We want a fair society for everybody, not just a select few at the top. And if that means borrowing money to invest in public services, borrowing money to make life better for people. That's what the Labour Party intend to do. I'm sorry if you dislike it, but that's the way it is. Can I just...
Let him just answer.
What are they doing about reducing the national debt, increasing at the rate of £5,000 a second?
It's the highest it's ever been now under the Tory government, and it's racking up as we sit and speak here. It's the Tories that are doing it, not the Labour Party.
I think the point he's making is you're going to increase it further, and maybe that's dangerous. I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
Ian? He's saying it's just... you say it's all being racked up now. He's saying you're going to rack it up even more with nationalisation.
The measures in terms of what we put forward at the Labour Party conference this week are all costed. Everything's been costed. No. We were the only party at the general election that costed every single policy. The only numbers that were in the Tory party manifesto were the page numbers. We identified everything because I think financial credibility, fiscal credibility is extremely important. And I understand what you're saying, by the way. Fiscal credibility is absolutely crucial for the Labour Party. That's why we costed everything at the election, and that's why everything is costed to the halfpenny. The proposals
and yet John McDonnell says there might be a run on the pound. If
exactly. How can that be fiscal credibility?
John McDonnell was, I think, what was described in the press as wargaming. We're a government waiting, David, and what we've got to do, we've got to look at the different scenarios in this country, both positive and negative. When we get them keys for Downing Street, it would be absolutely unbelievable just to have a look at potential positive issues. You've got to look at right across the different scenarios what could happen when we get those keys.
Let's go to the second question we had from Maurice Beard. Richard, do you think Theresa May is going to finish her full term, and would you like her to fight the next general election?
I'm afraid to say it, but if she does complete the full term, Jeremy Corbyn will be the next Prime Minister.
I disagree wholeheartedly. I think that we have a job to do working for the country. We have set out the position. She set out the position on Brexit, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point this evening. And next week at our conference, you will hear the vision that we have for building a country that works for everyone. And absolutely determined to make it a fairer country. I think Aisha talked about that. I absolutely agree. We do see people who've been left behind, but they've not been left behind as a result of Conservative policy. They've been left behind because of globalisation and because of actually a recession made by Labour.
All right. There are a lot of people with their hands up, and I can't go to everybody right away. I'll go to the woman there in the second row. Yes? With the spectacles. Yes. We'll just be quick now because I want to get on to some other topics.
You're going to be for everybody. What about the women whose pensions you've stolen? I've worked for this country for 46 years, and to get a full pension, I need to work for 52 years. You put my pension back by 6 years. I can no longer work due to ill health. Therefore, my pension gets more reduced because I am not doing 52 years' worth of
So will you be voting Corbyn?
I voted Mr Corbyn, yes.
You did? OK. And I'll take one more. The man with the black beard who I said I'd go to. Yes, you, sir. Then we must move on. Be quick if you
The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. Yeah. Secondly, Ian, you said that Jeremy was like this. So many people. It's great. He's preaching to the converted in the conference. Everyone loves him. But at the end of the day, he lost the vote. And
millions, though.
But it still didn't win the vote. That's great and all.
Sorry, what did you say?
He's brought back a lot of disillusioned people to politics. That can only be good. That can only be good.
He's also, I think, a bit delirious, if I'm truly honest with you. He thinks he's the political mainstream, literally quoted from him. Like, again, I'll go back to what I just said. He didn't win the election.
But what do you say? What do you say to his point, which is undoubtedly true? A lot of young people voted this time. And voted
of course they did, because he promised students something that he couldn't deliver. Let's face it.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, we get the point. I think we'll go on. We've got more questions about other political things. Let's go on. Before we do, we're going to be in Stockport next week, and we're going to be in Belfast the week after that. If you want to come Stockport or Belfast, there's the way to apply on the screen. Dawn Wilson, let's have your question, please. Dawn.
How likely are we to win a beneficial trade deal from a president who won the election on America First?
Right. This is, of course, in the context of Brexit. How likely we get a good trade deal? And, of course, we've got this Bombardier thing on at the moment, 220% tariff put on the aeroplane. Karen Bradley, do you think we've got any hope at all of getting a decent deal from the US, which seems to be the government's proposal?
Well, we're looking to do trade deals across the world, and that's why we need to leave the customs union when we leave the European Union, so we can sign those trade deals. But on the specifics of the Bombardier situation, I mean, this is a one-off. It's the first stage in a specific case, and the government has made very firm representations on this part and is fighting for those 4,500 jobs in Belfast and is determined to make sure that we do everything we can to protect those jobs, because this is an unusual situation. And I don't think we should look at it as meaning that it will hamper us from making trade deals in the future across the world, and that's what we want to do.
What makes you think President Trump will say to the Prime Minister, oh, all right, yeah, fine, sell the Bombardier, do what you like, I'll see you right. Or that he'll say, I came in, America first, it's exactly what I believe in, and you can go hang.
Well, I'm not sure how much the President is involved in a specific thing. It's a specific case, and we shouldn't read too much into it and extrapolate too much from it. But I think all the conversations that we are having across the world, and you know, this is across the world. I've been in South Korea recently. I've been in China. I've been speaking to counterparts from all around the world. People want to trade with Britain.
OK, Aisha.
I think we should be worried. I think this is a potential huge red flag ahead for these big trade negotiations. And the thing about Theresa May is, going back to the earlier question, she is a weak leader at home and she is a weak leader abroad. And when she took Donald Trump's tiny little hand when she went on that famous trip to America, and he assured her that, you know, it would be, the idea that he is not going to put America first. And I think everybody knows, we voted to leave the EU. That is what is going to be happening. But nobody voted to be poorer. Nobody voted for worse jobs and growth and economy. And so I think we've got to think very, very carefully about the difficulties that lie ahead. Boris Johnson said that he wants a jobs first Brexit. I think he meant his own job, personally.
Ian Lavery.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. This latest development really, really concerns me. It frightens me. The fact that Theresa May says and Donald Trump says we've got a really special, cosy relationship. We'll get priority in terms of any trade deals. And here we've got a situation where we've got the potential of 4,000 jobs being lost in Belfast. Now, Theresa May is very much aware of the situation. Apparently, she spoke to Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago. And what has Donald Trump done? Very little. He's allowed the Department for Commerce in America to apply a 220% tariff.
Mm. Is that why
Is
that why he wants to stay in the single market?
Well, the fact that...
You do want us to stay in the single market, don't you?
We want to stay in the single market. We want to have the benefits of the single market after the transition period. During the transition period, we want to be part of the single market. Of that, there isn't any doubt at all. But the point I'm making is, this special cosy relationship with America, it doesn't hold any water at all. Trump doesn't care less for the UK, and we've got to be very much aware of this once we leave the EU. And this does concern me very much, by the way. We've got to think of these people who might fall off the cliff edge in terms of their jobs, their livelihoods, and their communities.
All right, we'll come to what Labour thinks about the way we should go. But Richard Tice, you've heard.
Well, let's remember, the European Union is the biggest protectionist trade bloc in the world. It has over 12,000 tariffs on goods that come into it. The reality is, of course America's going to say America first. And we, when we negotiate our own trade deals, should quite rightly say the UK first. And when we do a free trade deal with the US, which we will, they've made it very clear we will, and you don't need to cover everything. You can do a partial trade deal on things that you can agree on. When we do that, we will actually be in a much better position to be able to negotiate and to say to America, when they get things wrong, which clearly they probably have in this situation, actually, that's against the rules. You know, it needs to be taken to the next court and the next court. The problem is, at the moment, actually, legally, we can't do anything. It has to go through the European Union.
But Richard, I'm sorry, the idea that we are going to say to America, no, Britain first, and we're up against America, that is just not how it's going to work.
Well,
that is not the way...
I'm going to say Britain first.
You can say, in the same way you said, there'd be £350 million a week for the NHS on that bus, and guess what? It didn't come to pass. So, you know...
Peter Hitchens?
Well, I think we do have to understand that the United States is not and never has been our friend. This is not the way that relations work between countries. Countries have their own interests, and if they've got any sense, they'll pursue them. Our major fault as a country over the past several decades is we haven't pursued our own interests very hard. And this is something we should do. It's only to say that everybody wants to trade with us. Well, indeed, everybody wants to sell things to us. But when it comes to buying things from us, it's rather harder to do, especially if you don't make very much, which is a big problem we face. And I think sometimes there is a little bit of over-optimism among people about just exactly how well we are going to be able to do out there on our own, and they should perhaps rein it in a bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with being able to make your own trade agreements, but to imagine that suddenly, just because you're free to do so, everybody will be rushing to buy your largely non-existent products from you, seems to me to be slightly overestimating the future.
Peter, is your view that, I mean, I don't know what you think Labour wants, but is your view that we should stay in the single market if we can and do some sort of deal like that?
The whole European Union thing came the wrong way round for me. I think we need to transform the politics of this country and get rid of the Conservative Party before we left the European Union, because we needed a government that understood why we needed to leave it and what we needed to do. And we could then have had all these discussions before the Act of Parliament was passed, taking us out, after a general election had agreed that's what we should do.
So which government would you... Sorry, Peter, hang on a second. You've lost me for a moment.
It seems to me at the moment, to be fairly clear, that it would be much wiser for us to take the Norway option of staying in the single market and leaving the customs union for a fairly lengthy transitional period, during which we can, as a matter of fact, get control over our borders, and we do leave the control of the European Court of Justice, and we will be out of the European Union in a lot of very important ways, much more quickly than we will be.
But Peter, I didn't quite understand what you say. You say we should have had an election first.
I think we should...
Well, hang on. I'll just ask you the question. And had a government that understood what to do. What government would that have been?
Well, here's your problem.
Are you saying that the Labour government?
I didn't vote in the referendum. I was against it because one of the reasons for this is that you have a voting result which nobody is responsible for. The day after the referendum, nobody was responsible for implementing its result. If somebody had stood for election on leaving the European Union, those people would have been responsible. The people responsible for getting us out of the European Union vanished the moment the vote was over, and they're nowhere to be found.
Yep.
And we now have a government full of people who want to stay in it. It's the most ludicrous, perpetual constitutional crisis, and it plagues us every day.
You say you now have a government of people who want to stay in?
But the government is mostly composed, in fact, Parliament, both houses of Parliament, the courts, the civil service, mostly composed of people who want to stay in, reluctantly with their teeth gritted, fulfilling a mandate they don't agree with.
And Ian Lavery, Labour want to stay in?
Well, you tell me. I mean,
Ian?
No one knows.
It's impossible to work out what the Labour Party...
In the EU, in the single market of the EU.
The Labour Party is absolutely crystal clear.
Absolutely crystal
clear. Crystal clear on this.
Crystal clear.
And we are fully committed to the will of the British people that's leaving the EU. We want to remain as part of the customs union and part of the single market during any transitional period. Following that, we understand that we believe in the single market, but want to have a proper, harmonious relationship with our partners in the EU, despite the fact that will not be in there, and that would mean wanting the benefits of a single market.
And how long a transition would you find acceptable?
I think the transitional period, I think what we've said is that as short as possible, but as long as necessary.
That means a long time. Come on, let's be honest.
It means as short as necessary.
Let's be honest, everybody knows that your position is changing week by week, and now you've got you've got the chief. Increasing numbers of people in the Labour Party at the conference this week are talking about a second referendum.
Are you prepared for a second referendum?
I fear that we may have to prepare for a second referendum, given that I fear that we are potentially, which is a shocking thing.
All right.
We are potentially being sold down the river.
Listen, when someone is peddling myths, it needs to be responded to. The Labour Party are committed to the will of the people.
Good.
We will be leaving the EU.
So no second referendum. Crystal clear.
Second referendum.
Has everybody heard that?
No second referendum.
Excellent.
That's the policy of the Labour Party. If people like yourself continually perpetuate these myths, it's just not helpful for anybody.
The Labour Party on this is just like Groucho Marx. These are my principles. And if you don't like them, I've got other ones.
Although to be...
The woman in green there, in the third row from the back, and then I'll come to you, sir. The woman in green there.
Oh, yeah. I just feel that I voted to remain, but now we're over that now. We need to learn why we're leaving. We need to work together to negotiate. They don't seem to in Parliament to work together. It's more, we're remaining, the single market, but people didn't want the single market, people want to leave. So why aren't we working together?
Okay, so you think that the MPs, even if they voted to remain, should get behind
they should all just get
the leave.
behind it. It's happened.
All right. And I said I'd go to you. The man in blue with spectacles there, yes.
Going back to the...
No, the man in blue with spectacles, that's you.
Going back to the original question, given how long the establishment seems to be dragging out us leaving, Trump probably isn't going to be president anyway.
All right. And yes, and you say here.
What part of leave don't you understand? The British people last year voted to leave. We talk about a transition period. The British people didn't vote for the transitional period.
So you're against what the Tories are doing?
Yes, exactly. You know, she stood on a platform in Florence last Friday talking about transition. It will take 2 years. We hear David Davis talking about progress. There's been no progress whatsoever.
Karen Bradley?
Well, I disagree. There has been progress. There's been progress, for example, on European medical cards, but we want to see more progress. Of course we do. That's why the
European medical cards?
Yes, those medical cards will continue. Look at that. You see
what
progress.
Else? Where else have you improved?
But the point is...
Sorry, there have been... How many months?
15 months. Great.
But no, this is during the negotiations, and we are making progress. And he's making...
But he said that you didn't vote for transition. They voted to leave
But
the
I think
EU.
what the Prime Minister set out last week was she set out very clearly, Europe wants to go down a different path from us. So whether you voted to leave or remain, I think, you know, the number of people in my constituency have said, I voted to join a European Economic Community and I found myself a member of a European Union. Europe wants to go down that union path. It wants to go down more federalism. We don't want to be part of it. But I do think we need to be pragmatic about how we leave. We don't want to give people two changes. A change when we leave, which we will leave in March 2019, and then further change when new arrangements come into place.
I do agree with you. Look, the government has been in an absolute shambles about its Brexit negotiations. Progress has not been made. I wouldn't trust David Davis to negotiate a happy meal, quite frankly. But I do take your point. That we are leaving, and I'm a Democrat. I was a Remainer, but I respect the result of the decision. But it's not heretic to ask questions about how this is going to affect jobs, how it's going to affect the economy, how it's going to affect business. I've spoken to people who voted leave. They still absolutely stand by their decision to leave, but they are increasingly anxious about what's going to happen to the economy. And when you are a leader of a country, it's entirely patriotic and the right thing. When you can see an iceberg or a fatberg that is Brexit coming towards you, you do have to ask questions, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Why are you scaremongering yet again? We've had this throughout the EU referendum campaign as well. It's like George Osborne saying that families would be £4,000 worse off. 6,000.
All right, let's not refight that thing.
And I think as well, you mentioned the single market. Have you saw how many German motor cars are on the road? Have you saw how many French bottles of wine are in Selfridges or wherever? Wake up.
But we also have Jaguar Land Rover, so we have brilliant British cars that we want to sell to the rest of the world.
I'm going to take a couple. I'm going to take a couple more points. I'm going to take another question. The man in the check shirt and then the man in blue behind you. The man in the check shirt there, yes. Be quick if you would.
I can't believe how bitter the European Union are being. We've given so much away already. We've given potentially £20 billion away on a transitional deal. The European Union don't want to give us anything. I'll just say, leave it be. Go to World Trade Organisation.
Okay. And the man behind you there.
We have a democratic system. It's not perfect, but we voted by an overwhelming percentage to leave. I actually voted to stay in, but democracy says we go out. How can you be talking about a second referendum? People are saying we should have a second referendum because the Leave people have been misled. If we had a re-election every time a politician misled us, we would be forever having elections.
Rebecca Cooper, I'd like to have your question, please.
Following the German election, is the increased popularity of right-wing parties across Europe a sign of distrust in the EU's open door policy on immigration?
The German election and the rise of the right there and in other countries, is this a sign of distrust in the open door policy on immigration? Ian Lavery, you start on this.
Well, this again disturbs me greatly, the issue on immigration, because lots of people believe that this country is overrun with immigrants. I value the contribution that immigrants make to our country. And it's as simple as that. I don't put a label around immigrants' necks saying I'm valuable in terms of my financial contribution to the UK. I embrace immigrants in this country. We've got to have correct controls. There isn't any doubt about that. We need to understand.
There are questions about Germany and the rise of the right in Germany.
How many people we've got immigrants in this country? The rise in Germany, you could see it coming. I think it was Merkel herself who said that she perhaps made a bit of a mistake by allowing the doors to be opened completely. But listen, in Germany, in France, here in the UK, we need to stop blaming all the woes of our economies on immigrants and realise what contribution they make to our society.
Well, I'm very pleased that Angela Merkel won again, but yes, I am worried about the rise of the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland. They are essentially a racist Nazi party, and they made a big step forward. They did. They are, and they made a big step. They made a big step forward, or should I say a big goose step forward at this election. But no, it's true. They said that actually World War II was all fine and that the German army did a really good job. I'm sorry. They are a racist party. But the point is, Angela Merkel, I think, is a pragmatic politician, and I think she's a politician with humanity as well. She's actually not a communist.
She's an Eastern European communist, and she's got the uniform.
I will tell you something. She has got values, and she has got pragmatism, and she understands the history. She understands, and actually you're a bully because you won't let anyone else talk, all right? You're just going to keep shouting at me? Let's just say, if you let me speak, I'll let you speak. I'm going to say this one thing. In a world full of, demented men like Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, these kind of crazy man-babies, I'm very glad that Angela Merkel is there. I'm very glad that she's there. And she actually, in terms of global leadership, she is a moral authority in a very, very scary world right now.
The woman here. Yeah. No, the woman. The woman here.
You say that...
No, I want the woman here to speak. She had her hand up.
My family's from Germany, so I have a vested interest in German politics. And part of the reason why I actually quite like German politics is their proportional representation system. And you can see from the rise of the AfD that whilst, yes, they do have racist tendencies, we can't, work against that. But you have to see that people are voting for them, and if people start voting for those parties, you have to think, as politicians, what should we do to, get back the voters and get what people want?
And what do you think of the open door policy on immigration within the EU that the questioner was saying may have led to the rise of the right?
Personally, I believe that every country should have the Australian points-based system.
Right. Richard Tice.
The reality is, you get the rise of parties on the right or the hard left if the politicians from the centrist parties don't listen to the people and deliver for the people. And I think that's what's happened in Germany, it's happening in other countries, and politicians need to take that away, listen, and frankly do better.
OK, the man there in the... Yes, you say.
I'd say every country needs immigrants because the skills gaps are massive, especially here in the UK. But it's got to be controlled. It's got to be controlled immigration. So you choose the people that we need. Absolutely. And that's not being nasty, that's just the way it's got to be.
All right. Karen Bradley.
Well, I don't want to speculate as to why people in Germany have voted the way they have. It's a democratic country and I respect the result and pleased to see Angela Merkel re-elected. I think it's worth reflecting as well, it's not that long ago there were concerns about the election in France and actually the voters did reject the extreme parties. There is no place in society for extremism like that from political parties. I'm sure Ian would agree with me, including anti-Semitism. And I want to make sure that we see moderate, sensible, controlled politicians doing the right thing for their country and for the world.
Peter Hitchens.
I don't think it's true that the far-right parties in the continental European countries have been doing particularly well. After all, Marine Le Pen fairly recently failed in France and Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. So, no, but I think it's perfectly clear that Angela Merkel, who did not win any election on Sunday, she had a very poor result, and no political party has won an election in Germany since the 1950s, was punished for her great folly in throwing open the borders of her country. And I think she was deservedly punished. It's a pity that the punishment took the form of many votes for the AfD, which has some extremely dubious people in it. But that's what happened. And Richard is right. This is if people who are running countries arrogantly assume that they can fling borders open and that people won't care and won't mind, it'll make no difference, then they will be punished democratically. And there's nothing wrong with that. People should stop wailing about it. If she'd been a more sensible chancellor, she wouldn't have lost all those votes and the AfD would still be a minority party.
The woman in the second row from the back there.
Thank you. I don't think this is exclusive to the EU. I mean, all we have to do is look at America and see the rise of their far right and see that this is not a problem to do with the EU specifically, whereas it may be slightly, but it's a worldwide issue that we need to look at as a whole.
And are you alarmed by it?
Yes, absolutely.
OK. I'll take one more point, not you, because we've heard from you, but the man behind you. Yes.
As a member of the EU, should Angela Merkel have acted unilaterally in letting in immigrants?
Who'd like to answer that? Should it have been consulted? Well, what do you think?
No, she shouldn't have acted unilaterally. Right. And what she did was actually, clearly, as has been expressed in the polls, bad for Germany. And I think actually, it damaged people's confidence, whatever one's views about the European Union, it damaged people's confidence about the way that leaders behave. And you then had different countries all of a sudden changing the Schengen rules and acting, frankly, just purely in their own interest, because it had gone so badly wrong.
It didn't damage my confidence. Because I think what Angela Merkel is faced with a very, very difficult situation. I think she did what she did because she thought it was in the best interest of lots of people, desperate people who wanted to come into the country, and she deserves a lot of credit for that.
And I think
she got a lot of criticism for it. She deserves an awful lot of credit. It did bring problems. It did bring problems, but she's been re-elected, and I'm sure that through time it'll work its way through.
OK, one last point. Man in spectacles there, and then I'll go on to another point.
Angela Merkel is reaping what she sowed, basically. You can't expect an open-door policy on immigration and not expect repercussions. This country needs to focus on having a fit-for-purpose policy, a vetting procedure, which makes sure that the right people come into this country and not just have an open-door policy where anyone can come in and do what they like and everybody's too afraid to say
We also We've also got a lot of homegrown extremism as well. And let's not forget, the man who murdered Joe Cox was a white, right-wing man who was from this country as well.
OK. Right, I'm going to move on to another question now, because we've got Don't know how much time we have got, 20 minutes or so. Claire Agarwal, please. Claire.
Will the £500 million bailout for the NHS, which Labour are calling for, make any difference?
This was at the Labour Party conference, £500 million for the NHS for this winter. Will it make any difference? Karen Bradley.
Well,
you're not calling for it.
Well, we've given the NHS the money that they asked for. We have made sure that they have the funding they need, and I know the Health Secretary is working hard on contingencies for this winter. But it's not just about money, it's about how we run the NHS, it's about how it's configured, it's about delivering services, and it's about being ready for winter crisis when they arrive. I'm not sure that it's necessarily just that whatever money is promised by the Labour Party is necessarily going to be enough.
What do you think?
I really don't think it is going to be enough. It'll just be a little bit of a sticking plaster on the wider issue. It needs billions and billions of pounds spent on it, and even the Conservatives aren't really putting enough money in, as far as I can see.
But we've put the money in the NHS asked for.
Yes, but we don't feel that that's enough on the ground. I'm a GP in the NHS in Wolverhampton right now, and we've only just really got through the summer period. I really have a great fear that there's going to be a massive winter crisis like we've never seen this winter throughout the country, and people are going to be unwell. There's going to be frail elderly people that can't get any community care, any social care to keep them in their own home so they can be looked after there. They're going to end up in hospital where they shouldn't be, and they're going to end up with many more problems than they started with, and this is going to happen this winter, and I don't think there's going to be enough money to cover what's happening. So they put money in last winter. The Conservatives, sorry, you put money in last winter, but really we didn't see anything on the ground. Nothing really changed.
This is a Labour proposal made by Labour's Shadow Health Secretary.
It is.
Are you saying to Ian Lavery that it's not enough, that it's just a...
I don't quite know why they came up with that figure, to be honest
well, we'll
with you.
find out from him.
But can I be clear?
Hang on a second. I'll come back to you. Why did you come up with this figure? She's a GP working in Wolverhampton, is nowhere near enough.
Obviously doing a fantastic job, by the way.
But that's not the point, is it?
And last year, during the winter crisis, there was 10,000 individuals waited more than 4 hours a day for treatment in A&E, and we believe that the crisis, I agree with what you're saying, the crisis, impending crisis this winter could be worse than that. I mean, it was unbelievably bad in those hospitals, and isn't it fantastic that we've got these great doctors and nurses who, despite the fact that they've had their wages hammered, are that committed and dedicated to the NHS. Can you imagine what it would be out without 500
That's
million?
not the point of the question. The point of the question is not that. The point of the question is whether you are just making shadow boxing by offering this amount of money, because it's not enough to do anything effective.
It's very insulting saying that we're shadow boxing. It really is insulting. We're saying that there should be £500 million. We believe that should be put in place, and we're calling on the government to put the £500 million in place to try and prevent and help the NHS through what could be one of the worst crises we've faced in any winter for many, many, many years. I hope that it will be enough. I'll tell you one thing, the Tories will not be putting any money in to help the NHS, so we should be criticised when we say that we're going to put money into the NHS.
Ian, you always come up with another number and another number and another number. There needs to be reform. The GP who talked about social care, and that's where we need to work. That's why we put an extra £2 billion into social care. We need to make sure we've got the facilities on the ground. It's not an easy solution. You know, just throwing money at the problem is not the easy solution. This is far more complicated than that, and that's why we've got to work to reform the whole health and social care system so that it's more integrated and you have the services you need.
Some very damaging reforms, though, hasn't there? At the start of the Tory government that started with when they came into power. So I'm really not keen on any more large-scale reform, because I think that does actually waste money as well.
Integration of health and social care.
Yes, that would be good. That would be good. That would be a good start.
I'm correct that the figure is 0.5%, isn't it, increase on the total budget for the NHS, which is over 100 billion.
125 billion.
Yeah. Anyway, it's not a large number in proportion, but the woman there in the third in, yes.
I'm an advanced nurse practitioner and I work in an urgent care centre. and we are inundated. Every shift is busy to a ridiculous degree, and this has been over the summer months. I'm dreading the winter months. But we get people who come and sit there for 4 hours or more if they have to, because they can't get appointments with a GP. And they come to us because there isn't enough availability for GPs in the community. There isn't the funding to support the community care, and so they come to us. So we are absolutely stoved out with people that shouldn't be there.
Do some GPs send people to you because they haven't got the time and place to see them, numbers to see them?
They do, but obviously the out of hours, they come to us because we are there. But yes, they do send them to us because they can't see them, but that's because they are very busy too. It's an absolute vicious circle.
You, sir, with the spectacles on there, on the gangway, yes, and then I come to you over here. Yeah.
Yeah, this term, winter crisis, if we go back in time to when we had a Labour government, I don't remember that term ever showing up. It's something that in the last few years, every year someone says winter crisis, winter crisis. Well, the only reason we're having that is because this funding has been misused. You put in money there, but who's the money going to? How are things being managed? It's just not working, and it hasn't been working for years.
The woman there on the left. Yes. That's you.
An enormous amount of money could be generated if the public sector actually accepted what's been going on in the private sector for the last 20 years or so in terms of fundamental changes to pension schemes.
OK, and you here, sir?
I would say it's not just the NHS that needs funding and support and reform, it's also social care as well. Yeah. I mean, the local authorities and the savings that they've got to make every year has a much greater impact on the delivery of social care in the communities.
Richard Tice, I'll come to you. Richard Tice.
Well, I'd like to ask Claire and the nurse practitioner, is it the question of money or is it the way the NHS is managed? Because let's remember, the NHS has got 1.3 million people in it. It's one of the biggest employers in the world, and it is just so difficult. It's impossible to run a business that size, that serious reform has to be assessed. I think the big opportunity the Tories have missed is calling for a royal commission about how the NHS should be run and managed. It's not just money, it's managing it well. But Claire, you might have a better view on that.
I think we've got to look at both. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Richard just gave a bit of a reveal with the answer. The NHS is not a business. Quite. It is not a business which is there to make profit. It is a public service, and it's actually the jewel in the crown of this country. And the NHS definitely needs money, but the top-down reorganisation was very, very disruptive, particularly at a local level. That was something that David Cameron promised. He said, read my lips, no top-down reorganisation of the NHS.
All right, Claire, what about the question that Claire asked, sorry, the 500 billion bailout that's being asked for? Will it make any difference?
Well, I think...
Or are you saying the structure's so bad it won't?
It's probably not enough, because I think you need to reform social care as well. The gentleman here is absolutely correct. Local governments are being cut to the bone. They can basically... I mean, if they can hardly get the bins collected and do kind of child protection... Adult social care has been absolutely hammered. That is a really, really important part. That's why you have, people bed blocking in hospital because they can't get home. It's very, very difficult. The hospitals, the GPs and adult social care is all connected. And until we bring that all together, we are not going to solve these problems.
Peter Hitchens.
I'd just like to agree with Aisha, that although I am a black-hearted reactionary of the worst sort, I agree that the NHS is not a business. And we shouldn't treat it as such. But that doesn't mean that we should allow either of the political parties, as they constantly do, to grandstand sentimentally about how they are the ones who are going to save it, they are the ones who are going to reorganise it. It is, if we could spend the entire gross domestic product of this country on the NHS, and it would still not work properly. It is fundamentally a rather misconceived thing, and it works on the wrong principles. But I do tire both of the Labour Party and of the Conservative Party pretending that they are the ones who are going to save it. I think a political truce over it is necessary, and I think an absolute determination to reorganise it in the public interest, not as a business, is necessary. Not because I want another reorganisation, heaven forfend, as organisation, but perhaps we should stop running what is effectively a national illness service devised in the 1940s, and run something which is actually designed to promote the public health rather than what we have now. What we have now does not work and will never work however much we spend on it.
We have a couple of minutes, and I want to take one more question from Robin Williams, and I'll go round the panel on it. Robin.
Should sport and politics be kept separate?
It's a big question. Should sport and politics be kept separate? I assume you're thinking of the American footballers kneeling and...
American footballers, and obviously Mark Sampson, former women's England manager, having to go in front of a parliamentary committee over the allegations for him in the news as well. But mostly about, Donald Trump needing to get involved with asking owners of teams to fire players for kneeling during a raising of a flag at a national anthem.
Richard Tate.
Well, I think on that specific scenario, they had every right to express their will of free speech, and I completely applaud them for that. The reality is, in today's world, there is so much money in sport. The celebrities are sort of folk heroes around the world that, you just can't avoid it. Politics is involved in sport, and I think sport is involved in politics. But that actually, of course, that means that actually the people, the great sportsmen, they have an even greater role to play as role models for society.
OK. Karen Bradley, you're Secretary of State for Sport.
I was going to say, yes, it's my role.
It's your role. So, what do you think? But you have to be very quick, because we've come almost to the end of the programme.
Politics is life, and so sports people have lives, and therefore they will want to express those views. In terms of decisions about sports, it's very important that politicians do keep out of them, which is why, although the department that I run fund sport, we don't make decisions about the way that sports are actually run.
So you wouldn't be saying, get that son of a, I won't use the word, off the field right now, he's fired,
I
as Donald
wouldn't
Trump
say anything
did.
of the sort, no.
OK. Ian?
I love the NFL being in London. It's a brilliant thing that we've got it, and I'd like to see it across more of the UK.
Ian, briefly.
Well, I think, sport is wonderful. I like cricket, football, rugby, horse racing, lots of things. I think that sports and politics are interwoven. They're connected, but I think they are role models. People have got to take responsibility for what they do. We're in the media attention, but I also believe that they've got the right to protest, ensure what their views are, show them what their feelings are when there's natural injustice going on in this world.
I have to stop you there. We've only got 15 seconds left. You go. You take 7.5 of them, and then Peter. Take 7.5
Sports can be very powerful in politics. If we look back in history, Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, it was a very powerful optic seeing those men kneel, and they made history, and I salute them.
OK, and Peter, I give you 3 seconds.
If politics is show business for ugly people, then presumably politics is sport for unfit people. But isn't politics boring enough without having sport mixed up with it as well?
OK. Well, I'm sorry, there's a start of a good debate there, the start of a good debate, but our time's up, so we've got to stop. We only have the hour.